So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Beth Tomlinson with United Way of Greater Lehigh Valley. Your United Way, in partnership with Resilient Lehigh Valley, are happy to be sponsoring these office hour sessions with trauma-informed school-based behavioral health counselors to help support and celebrate our educators during this super stressful time. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with Resilient Lehigh Valley, we are a collective impact effort to increase youth and family resiliency by promoting trauma-informed and culturally responsive practices, organizations, and systems. Please visit our website at www.resilientlehighvalley.org for resources, free resources on trauma-informed practices, resiliency, social-emotional learning, self-care, mindfulness, and a whole lot more. You can request trainings as well on trauma and trauma-informed care and practices on the site as well. And before we introduce our coaches for the session, just some housekeeping rules first. I think we're all very used to Zoom rules. We ask that you please keep your audio muted and your video off. Video off because we're going to be recording this session and posting it on our Resilient Lehigh Valley website, and just protect everyone's confidentiality. And audio, just to keep the background noise down so we can really hear from our experts. Second, we hope for a vibrant conversation and ask you to share comments, questions, resources, tips in the chat. So please be very active on the chat. If you prefer to remain anonymous, you can change your username at any time. In the upper right-hand corner of your video, click those little three dots and you can choose to rename. Coaches will be monitoring the chat and bring your thoughts into the conversation. If you would like to ask or share something that you'd like to keep anonymous, you can private chat one of the three coaches and they will follow up with you through a private thread through the chat. Third, we are recording this session so that more educators can access these resources. Recordings will be made available on the Resilient Lehigh Valley website, also on the United Way of Greater Lehigh Valley's YouTube channel. And lastly, everyone in the session is asked to protect and respect the privacy, comments, and confidentiality of all the participants today. We really want to create a safe and supportive place where you guys can unburden what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, and receive some guidance and support from trusted experts in the field. And without further ado, we are delighted to be partnering with Pinebrook Family Answers and have them sharing their wisdom and expertise and unpacking some of the challenging behavior our teachers are facing. Today, we have Leslie Pinebrook, Vice President of Clinical Services, Kira Sylvanas, school-based therapist at Cheston Elementary in the Easton Area School District, and Ann Brainerd Marco, Director of Allentown Outpatient Services. So coaches, take it from here.
Okay, guys. Thank you so much. Like I said, just a reminder to turn off your videos and your cameras and to mute your sound, just so we can make sure that everybody can hear everything. So the way we're going to talk today is you guys submitted a lot of questions when you signed up for this, and we have them all, and we combined some of them because there are, as you can imagine, a lot of similar questions and concerns. But we're really going to go through each one, and we'll take turns and we'll all chime in. And you guys, please feel free to chime in on the chat. If you agree, you disagree, you have another perspective, we want to hear it. And we will definitely respect your confidentiality, but we will respond to the chat in real time as much as is possible. So we're kind of excited and hoping that we do get a vibrant discussion via the chat. But just in case everybody's just sort of, wiped for today and worried about the snow and all that, we will go through the list of questions that we have. And the first one that we're going to talk about in the questions that were submitted from you guys was something dear to our hearts. There's a rise in mental health concerns. And there's depression, anxiety, panic attacks, feelings related to isolation. And I think that's really, really important because when you're under a lot of stress, any mental health problems or difficulties or illnesses that somebody has can be exacerbated, can be made worse. The symptoms might pop up when they wouldn't normally be there. So if you're someone or your student is someone prone to depression, it's very likely that they're going to have more depressive symptoms. And right now, some of our coping strategies aren't really an option for us. Like, we're not getting together with our friends, and for all you adults, you're not getting together with your friends and drinking wine and talking about the rough day you had. We're not really doing that anymore. There's a lot of options that are less available to us and to our students as well. And we'll talk about what the students are experiencing in their homes as well. But right now, additional stress is making anything worse. So that's, I'll punt this to Anne next. But again, anything that's happening, whether it's depression, anxiety, panicking, you're more likely to experience it, and our students are as well. So that's important. Maybe Anne and then Kira, if you want to talk about your thoughts on that, Anne?
Yeah, I guess, the first thing that comes to my mind is that, the teachers are taking care of 30 children on a daily basis, but then they have their own personal lives. So, from a personal point of view, I would be afraid to go into a classroom in the middle of a pandemic. So, but they're rising above that. You're going in, you're dealing with that, but then you have to go home to your family. So please don't discount yourselves at all. When we talk about mental health issues, anxiety, depression, et cetera, all of those are normal during a pandemic. They're all very, very normal reactions to a very bizarre situation. So I think it's really important not just to think about the kids, because yes, you guys are taking care of the kids, and you a lot of times are the first people to recognize, hey, something's going on with this kiddo. But please remember yourselves as well, too. You're also human.
All right.
Yeah,
Kira, do you have thoughts?
absolutely. And Leslie and Anne both have lovely backgrounds that I don't have. I'm just as cool as they are, but they have cooler backgrounds. So to second what Anne and Leslie were saying, the first thing that comes to my mind is parents. What the parents could be experiencing: increased mental health concerns, maybe the presentation of symptoms that weren't there, for a long time, and now are suddenly being exacerbated or coming back due to the pandemic, and trying to take the responsibility of assisting in their child's education. It's a lot of stress. And if the home is feeling that, the environment then is more tense. And although children can know how to say a lot of things, they might not always know how to express that tension, to understand what that tension is all about. And so sometimes it might come out in other ways, such as lashing out or refusing to do work, or loss of appetite, or maybe the development of their own symptoms of mental health concerns, anxiety, depression. All these things can come out, and I'm sure a lot of you as educators are hearing about these things and seeing these things from your students. But we don't want to get stuck there, right? The important thing is not to get stuck there. Oh my gosh, all this is happening. It's to then be like, okay, what do we do?
Yeah, I think that, sorry. Yeah, we're going to do that all the time. We're going to do that the whole time, right? My thoughts too are that a lot of people think that depression looks a certain way and anxiety looks a certain way. And especially with children, you see a lot of different symptoms. Like you might see a child acting out, seeming like he or she is angry or frustrated, and it might be a sign of depression. Anxiety, kids act out anxiety in any number of ways. Maybe some might do it by just extremely low frustration tolerance, or they might withdraw into themselves. And that kid that's shutting off their Zoom screen because they can't deal with anymore, it could be a reaction to anxiety. And that could be chronic anxiety that they've been dealing with the whole time, or it could be pandemic related anxiety because all of a sudden dad doesn't have a job and mom is stressed all the time, and things at the home are much more chaotic. And unlike the older kids, these younger kids, they don't have a vocabulary for this. They don't have the words and the experience to understand this, whereas an older child might. So you might have mom not able to get out of bed because her depression is so significant, and the child doesn't understand that. So the child doesn't understand what's going on with mom, the child is stressed about it, and next thing you know, they're supposed to be showing up for Zoom, and they're not on, and mom's not making them because she can't get out of bed. All this stuff is like sort of an iceberg, the iceberg's bigger underneath. Like you see this little bit at the top, and here you have all this stuff underneath that. So Anne, I'll sort of punt this back to you.
Well, I was going to say, I think we're at a disadvantage this school year as well, because like you said, depression can show as isolation or it can show as anger. Normally what we're looking for are those dramatic changes. So if little Johnny is always this kind of really happy-go-lucky kid, but he's real shy and isolates, then, we don't worry about him. But then if suddenly little Johnny starts acting very irritable and angry all the time, then we start worrying about him. But this school year, having started out the way it did for the most part, a lot of these teachers don't have that baseline. And that puts them at a huge disadvantage. And I want to point that out, because yes, it can be isolating and quiet, which is like, great, he's an angel student, he just sits there and does his work, when actually he's feeling depressed and anxious. Or it could be, like Kira said, screaming and yelling and turning off the camera, and he's not just being a brat. This is the only language he has to express, I'm really scared or I'm really upset inside. So I think it's tough not having that baseline.
And then I'll see if Kira agrees with this, but at some point, a lot of our schools have sort of not abandoned, but they're really not able to maintain their SAP process. So what teachers go through, where Johnny's having all these problems, something's going on, I'll refer him to the SAP team. But where is the SAP team? We're all we're working from home here. So the processes aren't what they typically are. Kira, do you see anything like that in Easton?
Sure. So we call it child study in my building, and I know other buildings will call it that as well. But we do have that, and they have done an incredible job of meeting virtually, getting parents to meet virtually. And it's been really incredible, the amount of work that they've been able to do. So congratulations to all those child study and SAP teams that are really making it happen. But it is difficult, because before, parents could come to the building, papers could get signed, teachers and parents and staff could have conversations together. And that face-to-face interface, which we know is one of the best ways to create an alliance, it's not there anymore. Not at all in the same way that it was before. So there are challenges, absolutely. But there still are nice things like attendance, for example. I know attendance has been an issue because of Zoom and the hybrid model or remote learning. So the state does have regulations around attendance in schools, and you still have to have meetings regarding student attendance if they reach 6 illegal absences, unexcused absences. So, the school counselors are still on that, and the child study and SAP teams are still able to do that. So I think that's a real positive, is that we have that backing from the state. And it really helps, because once you start talking about attendance, you can start finding out the other issues that are going on. Why is there attendance issues? And maybe they just need support. Maybe they just need better internet, or a better way to get to work. So there's a lot that can be done just from reaching out to talk about something like attendance. And the teachers are also doing an incredible job communicating. So I don't know if you've heard more about that, maybe, Anne, and some of your, like, the concerns that your clinicians have or know about. Sorry, in terms of collaborating with the school, SAP meetings, child study, if any of these things are still happening or challenging.
Well, let me jump in, Anne, let me jump on you for a second. Just in our school-based program at Pinebrook Family Answers, I know that the schools are all so different in that. And some schools have been able to do that, and some schools have done it less. So props to the schools who have, and everybody that's working hard to get that stuff done. But I know I hear a lot of feedback from our other school-based therapists about, oh my gosh, I don't know how to get this kid in for services. We don't really have our SAP process like we used to, or our child study process. So maybe the referral to Anne's kind of outpatient services might not be taking place. And do you see an increase, decrease? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Well, I mean, I've seen an increase of referrals from our school-based clinicians, which is fantastic. We've been able to work collaboratively with them to help kiddos get psychiatric evaluations to see if medication might help them in this instance.
Mhm.
So yeah, we've definitely seen an increase in that way.
Okay, guys, in the interest of time, let's hop on to the next question. I don't know, Anne, I'll throw this to you. What about, like, I love this topic, exhaustion.
I had to chuckle when I saw this because, as you well know, Leslie, I said, are we talking about the teacher's exhaustion, the kids' exhaustion, both exhaustion? I think to address the kids primarily, because I really want to focus on the teachers. I think a lot of the kids, their parents, as we've said before, are working or are very depressed, and it's sounding to me, at least from everything I'm hearing, the kids are having a lot more autonomy. So we have a lot of kids who are staying up till 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning playing video games, and then mom and dad are going, hey, get on to school, and they are exhausted. They're tired, like physically exhausted. But then we also have the kids who are living in fear of the virus. We have a lot of parents, I see in a lot of my notes, who are telling kids, you cannot go outside, you cannot see this, you cannot do that, because you will get the virus and die. So these kids' anxiety is through the roof. So then they're perseverating on that and worrying, and so then they're psychologically exhausted and emotionally exhausted with all of that. So, what can we do about that? We can preach good sleep hygiene, but ultimately it's up to the kids. But my concern really is with the teachers, because again, we've got, teachers who are still having to do treatment plans, teaching plans, for daily. A lot of them are married. They have their own families, their own children. They've got to help their kids with their work. They got to prepare dinner. They got to do the grocery shopping. They got to do the laundry. They got to do their lesson plans. They got to grade things. They got to be on Zoom all day. I mean, talk about exhaustion. And how do you work in good sleep hygiene to that and complete everything? And I think that's really where we need to talk about setting really healthy boundaries, in terms of, okay, I have to be on Zoom from this hour to this hour. And then I'm going to maybe take a 15-minute break and sit in my car and listen to music while my husband takes care of the kids. And Leslie and I have done a trauma training, and I have a slide that says sometimes self-care is nothing more than sitting in your car, blasting music, and I think it's eating Reese's cups or something like that. And I think that's important, is to give yourself those little mental breaks that you can relax physically. Maybe you just sit in silence and meditate. Maybe, you read something for 15 minutes that's enjoyable to you, but you give yourself those breaks. And then too, observing good sleep hygiene. Try to get to bed on time. Don't use electronics at night. Have the room a little bit colder. Just you're back to basics to try and get that restorative sleep so that you can keep going through all of this. And the other thing I just want to plug too is a lot of people are talking about blue blocker glasses. And one of the clinicians' pages I'm on, there was a huge debate about them. And a lot of people said, you know what, I didn't go to my ophthalmologist or optometrist. I got a pair off of Amazon, and they really did help. They were only 10, 15 bucks, but they helped me. They helped with the eye fatigue and just having to stare at the screen all day. So I wanted to throw that out there too, just in terms of that kind of exhaustion.
That's a really good point with the sleep hygiene too, and I can speak to that. I'm having trouble sleeping too, because you're up at night worrying as like what's going to happen with the job, what's going to happen with the school, but just a reminder that our kids are doing that too, and they may not be telling you that they're doing that. So if your kid's lying awake at night worrying about your students lying awake at night worrying about getting COVID, and then as Anne said, not able to function in the morning, you're not going to know that. You're going to know that they're like, running off camera or, flipping to, Snapchat or whatever the kids do these days. So it's sort of a good transition to something that we keep coming back to in terms of the topics for today is kids' attentiveness. And I don't know, Kiera, if that's maybe something that you can talk about just in terms of how kids are really just, they're not paying attention. They're not able to do a lot of things, which is another topic on our list. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that difficulty in attention and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this question kind of had a poor emotional regulation tied into it too,
Good.
and expression of thoughts and feelings.
Mhm.
But I'll talk a little bit about the inattention first. For anybody, I think that a lot of us might struggle being at home and doing work at the same time, where a lot of distractions can sometimes take place, and kids are just like adults. We struggle, sometimes being in our office at home, and we struggle sometimes being stuck in a place for too long at once. And I think that kids experience that a lot too. Inattention is not new, especially when they have a piece of technology in front of them that they're perhaps used to doing games on this machine instead of doing work on this machine. And so it's really tempting to open up a new window and do some other things on the side, or turn and play your game because it's there. This is why workspaces are very nice. So I always encourage my clients who are struggling with inattention to create an environment that feels like an environment they want to pay attention in, right? So what works for you? Oh, I like having a desk. Oh, great. Let's get you on a desk. I hate desks. I want to be on the floor. I'm so much better on the floor. Well, great. Put yourself on the floor, but make sure you have your pencil and your whatever you need, your passcodes for Zoom. Make sure they're handy. So, creating an environment really helps with attention. And then also with attention, it's another difficult thing, but establishing consistent and regular routines. Parents can do this. Teachers can do this as far as like Zoom times and things like that, but sometimes schedules change. That happens too. As the school districts are figuring out when, like how they want things structured, and each building is also figuring out how they want things structured, schedules will change. But for the most part, we can settle on one, be consistent, and then just having routines at home. Okay, we know at this time this is happening. And then between those work times is really beneficial to get your fresh air break. If you can step out on your front porch, back porch, if you can do some yoga or have some movement, to get your brain a little more regulated, you got to give it that time to be playful, especially as a kid. They need playtime. So that's what I'll say about attention. If there's
comment on
more
that?
specific questions
Can
about
I-
that, I'd love to follow up on them if you just type them in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, let me comment on that too, because that came up during our early childhood office hours last week. And that's, if you can take your whole group or your whole class and stand up and say, everybody on Zoom, all right, stand up now, we're going to stretch, maybe shout something out loud, or sing a song, or just something like that, to stand up, move, get that energy flowing, or get that, some of that tension released. But also with everybody doing it together, it can sort of bring a cohesive idea to that group. So they feel like we're all doing this together. And then the other thing that's worked, and I really love the idea, Kira, of making sure that you have a separate workspace for the kids, although that's really, teachers don't have a lot of control over that, but it works really, really well. But the other thing that teachers can do is a really quick beginning to every Zoom meeting, just a review of what the expectations are. So either review them yourself, ask the kids. In behaviorism, we call it pre-teaching. So you say, okay, so what are some of the expectations for this meeting? And maybe the kids are waving their hands and you call on them, or maybe you just say it. Okay, we stay in our seat. If you have a question, we raise our hand or put it in the chat or whatever, however it works with Zoom. And just remember that we focus on the screen, but whatever the expectations are, just taking 2 minutes to go over them at the beginning of every session. So that can be really helpful. Do we want to talk about emotional regulation? Kira, I don't know if you want to jump back to that.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
sure.
wait, before you do, I just wanted to, there's a comment in the chat, which is really great. And somebody said that she prepared a tote bag with supplies to keep at home and a laminated checklist for them to use to prepare for Zooms and times. That's a great idea. And that person seems to be full of great ideas. So thank you so much for that.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sorry, Kira, so back to you, like poor emotional regulation. Maybe we'll talk about that.
Sure. So this one was poor emotional regulation and expression of thoughts and feelings. I'm certain that's going on a lot, especially for this age group. I think it's, again, like, as I mentioned before, that the tension that kind of can exist at home or maybe at school even, or fear or anxiety, and kind of the tension it creates in the body itself. And kids don't always know what that's about, especially our kiddos who've endured any kind of trauma or are enduring trauma. And so it's really important to pay attention to those things. And if it seems like the lack of emotional regulation is so severe that there's probably something indicating traumatic experiences, and then I would suggest, reaching out to your school counselors or the other professionals in the building to start that conversation about perhaps getting them services. And beyond that, I think emotional regulation is one of those things we have to name, especially for the younger ones. Naming coping skills, practicing coping skills, naming feelings. Some children don't even know what feeling they're expressing in the room. And so I always advocate for, you're a teacher and you know how to teach things, right? So teach them, you're feeling fear, you're feeling anger. I can see your anger, I'm witnessing your anger. I can see your sadness. And so just naming things is really helpful. And then being able to kind of like coach them through the experience of, well, this is what people do when they feel fear, when they feel anger. This is what we do, and this is what we don't do. And so that right there kind of like can create some boundaries, as well as ways for them to actually express what is going on inside. Expression of thoughts and feelings. So again, some of the older students might be able to come up with some words about this, and it's kind of a scary thing, I think, for a lot of people to inquire, because folks are feeling like, if I bring this up, right, or if I encourage this kid to talk about what their feelings are, maybe some things I don't want to know are going to come up, or maybe this will give them a platform to then to share these things that maybe they're just feeling in the moment, who knows. But so I would say, I would say that feelings aren't that scary. The feelings aren't that scary. Feelings, kids, sometimes they just need to be heard, and they just need someone to say, I hear you, I can see what you're feeling, affirmation. Yeah. So yeah, and don't worry about yourself. When someone brings up, well, sometimes certain feelings that kids might feel might trigger us and our own emotional responses. So, kind of be wary in that respect, but trust yourself. If kiddos start to bring up something and you're the only one to hear it, and just have a natural response, show that you care, keep that relationship alive. A lot of this comes back to relationship.
That's great, Kira, that's awesome. And you're talking a lot about, trauma, and a lot of teachers, I'm sort of going a little off the cuff into the trauma training that we do, but a lot of teachers struggle with, oh my gosh, well, what if I ask them and they tell me some horrible thing that happened to them? And what do I say? What do I make? I don't want to make it worse. And maybe they're going to tell you, hey, you say, hey, Joey, you look sad today. And Joey says, well, my grandfather just died of COVID, which is a reality. And the only thing you ever really need to do to say when a student tells you something devastating that happened to them is, I am really sorry that happened to you. I'm really sorry. And that's going to convey that you're caring, and it's not going to do any damage. You're just conveying that support to them. So that's my 10-cent nugget of wisdom for when kids disclose trauma to their teachers, because it does happen. We know that it happens. So we talk. Another question on our list talks, and it's a good segue. Students being scared because of COVID. So I'll talk a little bit about that. You guys, please jump in. But I want to point out too that in the chat, the Resilient LV, United Way Resilient LV, posted that there's a site on the Resilient LV website talking about creating calm, where you can find social emotional learning videos and lesson plans. So if you want to use any of those with your students, they're available on Resilient LV. So do check that out. But we talked about students being scared because of COVID, and Anne, you mentioned that as well. Maybe parents, a lot of parents were very good at sort of passing on our own fears and our own anxieties to kids. And a lot of us have fears and anxieties or frustrations or whatever it is. The reality is that the kids maybe do have grandparents who are at high risk. And I'll sort of punt this one to you, but in terms of dealing with fears, but also maybe some of the students' grief, like thoughts?
Yes, we're seeing it a lot. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people getting very ill and or passing away. The fact is, those kids sometimes don't feel as comfortable talking about it at home because they don't want to upset mom, dad, brother, sister. So they're going to bring it to school, which is a compliment to you guys. It really is. It says that, they trust you, but it's another burden to you. But as Leslie said earlier, just offering that validation of, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm just so sorry that's happened to you, and I think even giving them permission, like, if you need to take a little break, just let me know. I don't know how you can communicate, if it's in the chat or something, if you can send me private chat, I just need a few minutes. I need to go cry for a little bit or whatever. And that's okay. Normalizing their feelings, like Kira said, just normalizing, because they do believe in you. They do trust you, and that they're coming to you and saying, I'm really hurting. I'm really hurting. And you offering them that validation and saying, yes, you are. And that's okay. It's part of life. It doesn't feel good, but it is part of life, and it's okay. And I'm here for you, and, we'll support you as much as we can.
That's great. And do you want to jump in and talk about the issue that somebody brought up about motivation at home? We've been talking about the parents and what the parents are dealing with. You want to talk about that?
I mean, are we talking about the parents? Are we talking about the kids? Are we talking about the teachers? Are we talking about us?
Pick one. I think maybe talk about the kids, and then we'll jump to Kira. But kids and motivation, like the kids aren't being motivated. Maybe they're not being supported. Maybe they're not even being supervised. I've had our school-based therapists tell us that the older siblings are supervising this kid's schooling, because that's what the family has to do.
And that's what I'm seeing and hearing more and more of parents are having to go out and have 2, 3, maybe 4 part-time jobs, and mom and dad are passing in the night, so older siblings are taking care of the kids. And then you get into this power and control struggle of, well, you can't tell me what to do. Mom said I'm gonna play my game, I'm not gonna do my homework, I'll do my homework when mom gets home. Or just they're all tired and they're all scared, and all they want to do is sit around and watch a movie together and maybe eat some popcorn and do nothing. How do we break through that? I mean, that's tough. It's again, creating, Kira had mentioned earlier, creating that school environment that they kind of look forward to going to in the morning. Good morning, guys. Hey, we're all here. Fantastic. Woohoo. Let's go over the rules real quick. It's tough to give motivation though, when you've got a lot of people around you unmotivated and unhappy themselves. So I think it's, recognizing the teeniest, tiniest bit of positive that you can see is like, hey, you know what? Okay, Johnny, I know you didn't do all 20 questions on your homework last night, but you did 5. Thank you for doing that. That's a great start. Why don't we continue to work on that a little bit, and recognizing and reinforcing as many positives as we possibly can? Because, I mean, let's face it, all of us tend to respond better to positive reinforcement than we do to punishment.
That's true. And Kira, what are you seeing? And then looking at the next question, the lack of motivation at home for kids, how teachers at your school are dealing with that, but also the question that's next on our list of like parents not responding. Kira, what do you see?
Yeah. So it varies per student, but for the most part, I would say that the parents are trying their best to make all of this happen, and I believe that. And the lack of motivation, I think, is definitely there for a lot of kids, especially any kiddos who have had issues with school in the past, who maybe have barriers to remote learning, like at home learning, maybe lots of chaos going on, multiple people getting on Zooms at once, the internet crashing, barrier after barrier can build up for some kiddos, and that can become very defeating. So finding out the sources of those barriers and trying to help eliminate some of them is something that educators can do, but some of those barriers you won't be able to help with. So case by case basis on that. I am seeing a lot of lack of motivation for some of my kids who have loved school, and they just find this platform, the remote learning, difficult, weird. The website is slow. There's inconsistent Zoom times. They want a regular classroom back. I hear that a lot. I want my regular classroom back. So it's really just sometimes they're just complaining. And other times it's enough for them to actually start avoiding their work. And then other times it's enough for them to not just avoid it, but become anxious about it, become fearful about it, to have doubts about their ability to do well. And then it turns into refusal, and there's emotional distress that can be tied into that as well. So lack of motivation can be driven by a lot. And it's also important, I guess, what parents are encouraging, what the attitude about school is at home. So, if it's within your possibility to find out kind of what the attitudes about school are at home, and to maybe create some motivation or foster motivation, that could be helpful. Some ways I've done that is to talk about, different work habits. Like, what would happen if certain people stopped showing up to work on time, or didn't do their work on time, or just left early. When we talk about Zooms, that's something I talk about, is leaving too early. And like, what would happen? And the kids are able to talk about, like, oh, if the veterinarian didn't, do all their work, then animals would die. Yes. And so then we talk a little bit about, okay, well, your life that you're living right now is work for you as a young person. And, you have work habits that you're forming. And so trying to create a little bit of motivation on that end, intrinsic motivation, can be helpful for some kiddos.
Kira, if I can just jump in real quick, because you said something that I did want to reinforce. You said, sometimes there are barriers that the teachers just can't help with. And I think that's really important to point out. I talked earlier about exhaustion and setting boundaries. And that's where, the teachers need to recognize, okay, this is something I absolutely cannot control. I've got to set the boundary, or else I'm going to spin myself right into space. So, just kind of recognizing how much we can help and where we have to stop. And sometimes that's really, really hard, but it's a really good thing to learn. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I wanted to just kind of pounce on that.
Good point. That's a great point. And then the other reality too is, yes, we can't do it all. You can't do as great a job as you maybe had planned to do in a full classroom. The other part of it that I think, well, at least I tend to forget, is this is going to be over. This isn't like, some things will stay different, but most of it will go back to normal, because, historically, that's how pandemics work. It's, a very difficult time for a period of time, but then it calms down and things go back to normal. So, and especially as a parent with kids in school, I'm like, okay, they're not going to be uneducated for the rest of their lives, and this is the end of it. Like, this is just a blip in the radar screen. So maybe this is not your Teacher of the Year award year. That's okay. That really is okay. You're doing the best that you can, and that doesn't have to be great right now. So, just keep that in mind. As we move on, like, again, please feel free to put stuff in the chat. We're excited to hear what your additional questions are. And then I'm just going to ask Anne to talk a little bit about not only, we've talked a little bit about the lack of support at home, but what do we do when we have parents that are like too involved, as in all of a sudden those assignments are looking really good? So how do we deal with that as educators, do you think?
Our helicopter parents who are determined that their kids are going to be straight A+ students all the time, no matter what. Honestly, you got me on that one. That's a really tough one, because I doubt teachers have the time to reach out to all of these parents and say, gosh, I've noticed that little Johnny's gone from not being able to spell cat to being able to spell physiological. It's a little bit difficult. I think it's just, again, looking for when, and I'm sorry, I always use little Johnny, and I don't know why. It's an age thing. It proves how old I am. But pointing out when it's little Johnny's work, saying, you know what, you did a fantastic job right there, and that is great. And focusing on what you really know the child did, and maybe not so much on what mom and dad might have done. But if it does get that bad, reaching out and saying, look, this is the worst year ever, and we're all struggling, and I understand you want your child to do really well, but it seems like maybe you're spending a lot of time with little Johnny to try and help him get things perfectly, and you don't need to do that. Kind of reframing it a little bit, not calling them out for doing the work, but saying, gosh, you must be spending hours with little Johnny helping him to learn this stuff so perfectly. And I just want to make sure that there's a good home balance like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
Kira, do you see that? I mean, do your teachers see that?
Yeah, some folks will tell me about how they know that they're getting help, or maybe even that a parent is on the Zoom with the kid, or like tucked off to the side and like helping during the Zoom. And I think there's a general acknowledgement of people trying to do their best to make sure that their kids are doing okay. Yeah, but it still is important to allow the kiddo to make mistakes, for sure. Whenever I talk to a parent who feels that pressure to help, and to double check things, and all of that, I always talk to them about making sure that the kids understand what the changes are, why they're being made, and to start to wean off some of that extra care that they're providing so that the student can develop better. It happens a lot with more like 4th and 5th graders. And so I found that, encouraging them to think about middle school and what middle school is going to be like, and what's going to happen when you can't, walk them through these lessons. So yeah, it's really developing that independent mindset for them.
I like that. That's a great way to address that. Like, is this going to work in high school? Is this going to work in middle school? Probably not so much. We got a comment in the chat, and it's a center providing childcare for virtual learners. First of all, thank goodness for you guys. You're probably like a lifeline for parents, providing that service. So I would encourage you to jump on our January version of for early childhood, just because we address a lot of those older kids doing virtual learning from the centers. But advice for that specifically, we have a lot of kids with ADHD, tools to keep them engaged, and kids starting to associate breaks with work avoidance. So you give them a break, maybe they don't come back at time. We do a lot of training for adults, and we have the same problem with adults. We say we're going to take a 10-minute break, and 20 minutes people are hopping back on the Zoom. So yeah, but a major problem with motivation, and I'll ask these guys to talk about it too, but I think we really, and I don't know what's available. This is sort of a new format, like this center provided childcare during school hours. But it's basically comes back to a little bit about what Anne said, is people respond to positive motivation. So I don't know if you guys can do something like, hey, if everybody stays on task for this 45 minutes, we're going to, I don't know, play a video or something really fun and exciting and energetic for them. I think, I don't know if kids sort of, take their breaks on their own, but if you do group breaks, but expectations that kids do certain things for breaks, get up, move, whether they get a snack, whatever they need. Kids aren't going to function well if they are starving or exhausted. So whatever they need to do, use their breaks for in terms of making sure their physical needs are met, it's going to be really important. And that includes exercise and movement. So yeah, I would encourage you to hop on our January early childhood office hours. But Anne and Kira, anything to add as far as that? It's sort of an unusual situation for COVID times, is the center-based at-home learning.
One of the things that clinicians have been doing just over telehealth like this is, okay, well, we've got to get this done. But then at the end, today it's little Johnny's turn, and you can show me your favorite 5, YouTube video, or play me your favorite song. Just let's get through this, and then you can have this reward. And the kids seem to be responding to that very well. It's like, oh, okay, well then now I've got a reason to do this. So they end up paying attention. Then they get that little kind of brain break where they get to play their favorite song for the teacher or for their friends or whatever, and then we can go back. So again, we've got to be creative with our motivation.
But make sure it's there. Kira, any thoughts on that motivation and what the center-based learners can do?
Well, I was thinking about the inattention and the ADHD symptoms, and I would just encourage them to kind of figure out what part of the ADHD maybe the kiddos struggle with more. If you have hyperactivity that's really high, doing a lot of movement for breaks is really good. Maybe even them standing up at their desk to, I don't know what physical space you have, and if they're set up at stations, but I'm imagining stations in my head, so I'm going to speak to that. If they're at a computer or their iPad, have them standing up to do their work, maybe making sure that all of them have some paper and a pencil in front of them, so that they can write down and somehow engage with what they're seeing virtually, whether that's writing everything down that they see or drawing or something, but something to keep them engaged physically with their hands. If you're seeing a lot of inattention, just maybe asking them, well, which part's hard? Oh, it's the reading. I can't focus during reading. Then say the words as out loud, whisper them to yourself. Some ADHD strategies to increase engagement, because they need multiple ways to interact with the material, which is really hard visually.
I think that something we want to point out too from a mental health perspective is that if your student comes in with a diagnosis with a plan that talks about a diagnosis of ADHD, that's one thing, but I want to remind teachers and all educators that inattentiveness and hyperactivity can be the symptoms of lots of different things, lots of different problems, especially stress, depression, anxiety, and particularly trauma. So if your kiddo has been through some pretty difficult things, which you may or may not know, more likely not, that could easily be the cause of their difficulty sitting still. I always say that it's hard to physically sit still and focus if you think mom and dad are going to be throwing dishes at each other at the end of the day when you get home, and now they're home all day. So, maybe mom and dad aren't safe at home. So just something to keep in mind when we talk about ADHD is it can be a lot of different things. So when you suspect ADHD, it's really great to refer for an evaluation. So keep that in mind. In the interest of time, we have about 9 minutes left, and we have a comment in the chat that reflects actually another question that we were going to get to, which is, what are the best ways building administrators can support their teachers during this time? And as we talk about that, please put stuff in the chat. If you need something from your principal or other school administrators, and put it in the chat so we all know. And I think it sounds pretty basic, but I've talked to some teacher friends and they said, do these principals understand that while they're asking me to submit this report and log in my data into Google Drive and do X, Y, and Z, that I'm also dealing with Johnny who won't sit in his seat and Mary who isn't getting breakfast in the morning and all that. And I don't know, as an administrator, I say, we really do. And we don't forget that stuff. But I think for a principal or a supervisor, it's really important to say, tell me what you're dealing with. What is causing you the most stress today? If you're a principal and you meet regularly with teachers, sometimes we do that, sometimes we can't do that, but giving them a chance to say, what is stressing you out the most right now? And that can be really helpful as a supervisor and administrator, because then you can say, okay, this teacher is so stressed out about this one situation, but in the terms of priorities, that's not a big thing. So maybe I can tell that teacher, oh, you can do that next week. Don't worry about that form that you have to fill out for me. But tell me what's really bugging you, and chances are, something that's going on with one of their students, and give them a chance to talk about that. And we know that as a principal, you are having your own stressors, and the people to whom you're accountable, we all have it. Everybody's stress is 150% right now. So when you're trying to support people, just really listen to them tell you what's going on. It's pretty basic. What do you guys think?
Well, and I think offering your support, not only asking, hey, what's stressing you, but how can I support you? Or how can we play off of everyone's strengths as a team to make this better? If you're struggling with this, but Mrs. Smith isn't, then maybe we can work something out this way. And obviously it's not going to come down to individual class assignments, but sometimes we just need some support. Sometimes it's, I absolutely, there's no way I can handle kids at lunch today. I can't do it. I'm at my wit's end. I didn't sleep. And that's where the administrator can say, you know what, great. Again, go sit in your car, blast some music, eat some Reese's Cups. I'm going to take care of your class during lunch, something like that. But not only that, being the listening ear and the validating ear, but how can I help and support?
Right. I love that. And that happens a lot at full staff meetings at our school. It's great that the administrators are offering an opportunity for everyone. Like when we're all gathered together, let's open up some of these cans of worms and kind of figure some things out, create action plans, talk about self-care. That's a big thing that that we emphasize at our building. So, giving them the chance to create a self-care plan. Everyone, you have this piece of paper that shows what a self-care plan looks like. We're going to take the last 10 minutes of this meeting, after we just got done talking about all this stuff, focusing on you. So what now? And so giving them the chance to create, opportunities for themselves to manage their self-care and to reflect upon them, upon what they have been doing, what makes them happy, what doesn't make them happy. And then I love when administrators I see them talking with teachers individually, or talking with the fifth grade team, during their regular monthly meeting or something, like just giving those opportunities to, hey, I can drop by your meeting, or, is there a time, that works for you where we can talk, or just making drive-by visits to just hear people out. I think that's a huge thing, because some people get quieter in large groups, and they want that more intimate kind of personal touch, personal time.
Yeah, I know your building does really well with self-care. And I know that when you guys are all live, back in normal times, you guys had a group where the teachers could come after school and just sort of like a support group for teachers, which I think is
Nice.
so fantastic.
And I will, Leslie, real quick to touch on that. We did have that. And then we brought it back the second year, which was my first year. So last year. And it was right before the school day started. And there were a number of teachers who took advantage of that. And then this year we started it again, and it was going to be a virtual meeting. No, I'm sorry. It was going to be an in-person meeting before school, spread out in our big music room that we have now. And there was not many people were showing up. So I think it was only like a couple every week. Mm-hmm. And that to me says, educators don't even feel time that they have. They don't feel that they have time for self-care because they can't make it, and all the extra things that they're doing, you know. And we have like the Ashanti Project hosts wonderful mindfulness meetings virtually, and I encourage everybody to check those out. If you see those emails, please like go on and do them. People, many people are saying and revealing that they can't make it. They feel too stressed and overwhelmed to manage everything else, that they're not attending to these offered self-care things. And that could just mean they're doing self-care on their own. And maybe that's more efficient and better for them, but it's something to consider. There's a lot going on.
That's a good point, because we set up a lot of things too at Pinebrook Family Answers, and some great ideas, and they just sort of fell off. People were like, I cannot do yet another Zoom, whatever. Even like Zoom happy hour, which sounds great, right? But no, people were just kind of, Zoom fatigue is a real thing. It really is. So as a principal, I would talk to your teacher about what self-care works for them. Like, you know, you don't need to be intrusive and ask about their, you know, their health and their personal stuff, but we at Pinebrook Family Answers, part of our employee performance evals sets a goal for self-care. So every year people are expected to have a conversation about what is your self-care plan. And so hopefully that could be beneficial as well. We have we're going to give you some contact information at the end. We're almost done, but we have self-care plan forms. And I know that we've given them out during trainings, and we're certainly happy to share that with anybody. We have one last comment, not one last, one comment on the chat. And this person writes that what has been helpful in their school is the teachers reach out to the counselors for help with the individual student or parent, you know, whoever's struggling. And if the counselor has no success, then they ask the administrator to speak to the family. And they work as a team. And then the administrator circles back, reaches out to the teacher with a follow-up as to what happens, and then empowers the teacher to continue that hard work. And as an administrator, when you're talking to that parent and they want to yell and blame the teacher, you need to support your teachers. You know, it's really important to do. If a teacher has made a mistake, yeah, you can deal with that, but back up your teachers and be a team with them, because as that person commented in the chat, that's extremely important. Guys, we're actually out of time. I don't know if Ashi from the United Way, if you're able to pop up our last slide. We have our contact information, but if you have additional thoughts or questions, we set up a website, officehours@pbfalv.org, and we're happy to take any questions, and we'll get them in, and we'll talk about them, and then we'll respond to you with that answer. In addition, we're going to do another January office hours session. I don't have the exact dates for that yet, but we'll make sure to get them out to you as soon as you can. So if we weren't able to address any of your questions, or you have additional questions, please join us in January, and hopefully we'll be able to get to everything at that. I want to thank my co-presenters, Kira and Anne. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And thank you to everybody for everything that you're doing in these crazy times. I hope that everybody is safe and healthy, and you guys have a wonderful holiday season.
Leslie, if I may real quick, there's a couple of requests in the chat for that self-care form. If you guys drop an email to that officehours@pbfalv.org, then we can get it back to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays, and
Thanks,
bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.